Subnautica is a game that, in my eyes, completely defined the survival genre as we know it. And it came out in early access, unassumedly, in 2014. And immediately, I probably picked it up a few months after it first released on Steam in that time period. And I slowly started to realize how incredible this game was going to be. At the time, it was very rough around the edges. The UI was pitiful, putting it lightly. But underneath the core concept of the game, that was enough to sell me and so many other people on this project, for lack of a better term. And the reason I say that is the actual premise, the open ocean as a setting for an entire game. It has never been done before to that level. Because the difference is you have games which will have water levels, and generally no one really likes them. They're rushed in, they're mechanically sparse. So no one ever thought to make an entire game around it. And Subnautica, in my eyes, I believe was the first to really do so. And it feels so foreign mechanically, having a whole game based underwater. But it works so well because it ties in to the themes of the game, right? You're set on this alien world with these alien feeling mechanics, trying to survive in an underwater. It just doesn't feel right because it directly goes against our human nature and how we as humans have gone back to in terms of surviving throughout history. I'm getting really deep with this one today. But I think that was the sort of mentality and push the devs really wanted to go through for the entire development process, is this idea of feeling like you're in a foreign world, feeling unsafe, feeling isolated. They really honed in on that, and I think that was one of the constants in a game that was, chopping and changing throughout the development period. And one of those key points which they really abided by was the fact there was no combat. And I think that's such a genius, seemingly counterintuitive, but genius idea. There are defensive measures in the game, which, something to actually critique about the game is they do trivialize some of the scary enemies when you actually understand the mechanics of the gun and the knife as well. They're actually very, very overpowered. But they initially, as a front, only act as defensive measures. They aren't going to save you. And they aren't meant as an offensive tool. And that, as I said, only adds to this idea of feeling helplessness in like a world that doesn't want you there in the slightest. And going off on that, I think that's the best part of the game, is because Subnautica and the devs who made it were so effective in using the gaming medium in every facet. Enemies, environments are dynamic, and that's what makes it so terrifying, because you can have a movie, probably the best comparison is something like Jaws years ago, where of course there is the fear of the shark, and it's the fear of the unknown that sells it, right? That's what makes it so exciting. Subnautica uses that same thought process and takes it to the extreme with the mechanics and technology that's available to us with this beautiful, beautiful medium of gaming, and does it so well. Because the open water, it's those areas where you start, tentatively reaching out into uncharted waters where you haven't been before, and you hear a little roar in the distance echoing to your ears, and you immediately want to turn, tuck and tail, and go back the other way. And it's that fear which makes it a game which isn't even a horror game first, so effective at that, far more than most of that actual genre. And that's part of the reason why I absolutely love it. And with that fear, part of the satisfaction that comes not just with Subnautica but with survival games in general is overcoming, right? It's learning to survive, then to thrive in these worlds which are initially hostile and dangerous. It's about conquering them and settling. And Subnautica, I think, does that better than any other game in the genre. Eventually, in 2018, it released fully to critical acclaim across all platforms. And I think people globally finally saw the game for what it really was. Now, I think the only critique majorly that I can give of a game like Subnautica is the performance issues were quite rife, then and still now, even at the earliest part of early access. It was pretty egregious, even on hardware back then. And even now, a lot of issues on some computers, even high-performing hardware, has issues with load times, LOD distances, and struggles like that, which can snap you out of the immersion. I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from that, is when you see drastic pop-in of grass loading in, objects just appearing in front of you, it does take you out of that immersion of this foreign world that you're trying to explore and conquer. And that's probably the biggest problem with the game. But looking past that, obviously we can't excuse technical issues. I think there's always a valid criticism of any game to be had there. But creatively and from an artistic perspective, a lot of times you can kind of just ignore them because the world is so beautiful and so intricately made. And I love it so how the further you go, deeper and further away from your starting location, these worlds and environments get so much more foreign, dangerous, and exciting to explore, you know, for better or worse, exciting and terrifying. I think, you know, without spoiling too much, because I think the game is best experienced with as little knowledge of it as possible. But I feel like I have to talk about a couple things. Stuff like finding the Lost River, which is this giant underwater toxic expanse, by just going through a little crack in the seabed and then unearthing this entire undersection. It's mind-blowing and one of my favorite gaming moments ever. I remember vividly doing that, and I think that's so telling when you experience something in a game that's so seemingly so insignificant, so little in comparison to the scope of the project and everything that you experience, but you remember it years later. That's a telltale sign you're experiencing something pretty incredible. And with the full release, we got the final completed version of the narrative. And the way the developers decided to take it was to sort of use a paper trail style of design, a la something like Dark Souls and even elements of BioShock, right? Where you've got voice recordings and, you know, PDA tabs to read and little lore drops. And, you know, these are elements which I think now, by 2025 standards, are largely overdone, but Subnautica does it sparingly and very well. And every piece of information you get, you have to work to earn it. And that's what makes it satisfying, because in a lot of games, they'll add these lore drops and, you know, big written paragraphs for your journal, and 99% of players will completely ignore them because they are nothing more than an afterthought. They're added as an extra sort of cherry on top. Within Subnautica, it's the meat on the bone. It's everything with the narrative. So every time you get one, you're eager to read these things. You're eager to find out the story. You're eager to find out what happened to these previous survivors who were on this planet before you. And I found that so compelling because it was one of the few games that did that style of narrative, but did it right. And that's a skill in itself. Now, I wish the same could be said for its sequel, which was Subnautica Below Zero, which released a few years later. Now, originally that was meant to be a DLC, and I think you can tell because the scope of the game is a lot smaller. And narrative-wise, throughout the early access period, because it also had one of those as well, they chop and change the narrative quite drastically. I remember the early periods of early access, the story was completely different to what we got in the final release, and I don't want to spoil anything. But my biggest gripe with it on a narrative front was, you know, that we had a game like the original, which focused on isolation. You were the only present character there. That's what made it so effective. In the second one, in Below Zero, you had other characters at play, and immediately that feeling of isolation is stripped away. That feeling of the unknown, the feeling of a lack of safety is gone. And that was really the downfall in terms of a narrative for Below Zero. Now, the rest of the game I actually quite enjoyed. I love the environments. I think a lot of them were far more beautiful than the first game. I think there's some really, really good work done by the artists and environmental team to put this world together. I just wish there was more. Not that there was more time to cook in terms of ironing out bugs, because I think they mostly did a good job at that. I just wish there was more meat on the bone collectively in terms of a world to explore, monsters to escape from, let's say, rather than fight. And, you know, I guess going forward, the main reason I wanted to talk about Subnautica, you know, obviously it holds a very special place in my heart. It's one of the few survival games which I really adore, because I think it shines in a genre which is extremely oversaturated, probably more than most. But the reason I wanted to talk about it was, one, someone gave me the suggestion in my stream chat on my MMA channel, but also because we've heard only a couple months ago with a little teaser CGI trailer, that we're getting a full-fledged sequel. And I'm cautiously optimistic for that, as I think everyone should be for most games and most sequels to beloved IPs. I think we've learned some lessons over the years with various titles, that things don't always go the way we want them to when we get a release of a new rendition, let's say. But with Subnautica 2, they've said that they're going full-fledged multiplayer. And that both excites me and kind of worries me. Because, as I said earlier, my problem with the narrative of Below Zero is that feeling of isolation is completely stripped away once you add another character into the mix. And innately, with a multiplayer game, whether it's mandatory or not, with Subnautica 2, you're going to have that same feeling. So they're going to have to find a way to evoke that emotion, evoke that fear, and curiosity as well within the story, they're going to have to do it in another way, because you can't have that feeling of isolation when you've got a friend to play alongside with you, for better or worse. And of course, with the technology and what comes with innately with the idea of having a multiplayer game, there's a lot more opportunities that open up, on that side of the coin. So equally, I am excited, and I don't know when we're going to get an early access drop, hopefully within the next year or two. But regardless, Subnautica remains the best, in my opinion, survival game of all time, and one that I highly recommend anyone who hasn't played a game before, or who even has. Check it out for yourself. Give it a crack. Thank you very much for my little ramble. I'm glad these videos are really picking up traction now, and we're building a small little community here away from my main MMA channel that you guys know. This is where I can just ramble and chat about the games that I love dearly, and I hope you can feel my passion and me conveying it to you. I hope you can really understand that, because that's really the goal of this channel. I want to share my love for the gaming medium, because it's my favorite thing, and I want to share that with you. So hope you can tell. I'll stop rambling now. I appreciate you all, and have a good one.